Okay, so in our first video we talked about what VBA is, and now let's kind of jump into sort of what we would think about when we're writing VBA code. So effectively you want to think about what kind of stuff am I doing that I'm doing the same thing over and over again, and how can I automate that thing so it doesn't so I can just make it automatic as opposed to having to sort of keep repeating myself every time. So in this particular case, we had this sort of fake poker winning tracker thing I made up. So let's say that each time I play poker, I want to fill this in. Now, this particular code's kind of wasteful. It's pretty easy just to type those 4 things in, but this is the second lesson, so it's kind of a beginner thing to do, just so you can get an idea of how to think. So remember the last time when we type sub, we got to give it a name. If I remember correctly, the name has to always start with letters, and then there can be numbers after it, but you can't start with a number, and you can't really have characters, and you can't have spaces. So we'll just call it poker and be done with it. But you can name it whatever you want. This is something you created. And then what I wanted to do is ask me the date, ask me how much I paid out, how much I won or took in, and then I wanted to put in this balance, right? So when you're writing code, the first thing we're going to probably want to get into is discussing what's called variables. So if you've taken science class or whatever, a variable is just like, if you remember from math class, you would type like x equals 1 plus y, right? Well, x and y were variables. That's why they didn't just say that 3 equals 1 plus 2. X could be something different each time, and y could be something different each time. And because they vary, they are variables, right? So the same thing is true when you're writing VBA code. You're going to have stuff that's going to be different from time to time. And that's why you're writing code to automate it. So if you know that the thing you're doing is going to change from time to time, then you want to make that thing a variable. You don't want to lock it in as just one thing. So in other words, when I'm wanting to enter in a new tournament, I don't want to make it just say Saturday, July 10th, 2020, because the date's going to be different each time, right? So I don't want to say the paid out needs to be 50 each time. It might be 100 next time or whatever. So anytime something is going to change or a variable, then I want to make it a variable. So let's do that first. So when we make variables, we want to define them at the beginning of our procedure so that VBA sort of expects them, so to speak, and knows what to expect. So we declare variables by what's called dimming them, and I think dim is short for dimension. It's just basically telling it what that thing might be. So we're going to make the first thing, we'll call it the date played. Now, I'm just going to type DP, and for all you perverts out there, stop, pay attention. I'm going to type DP for date played. Now, the reason I'm typing DP instead of date played is because I'm going to use my variables again, and if I have to type it out each time, it just gets slow. So you can use a lot of abbreviations like that. Just if you're going to do it, you kind of want to make sure you do it in a way that you're going to remember what it is, because if you're going to go back later and try and figure this out, you might forget what DP is. So anyway, the reason I didn't call it date is because VBA already has a function called date. So if I named it date, it would be a problem, because it would be looking to do something else with that. So that's why I call it DP. So we're going to type that as a, and you notice it's starting to help me fill this in. So we're going to call that a date. And then dim, we'll call it pay out. So PO as, And that's going to be, if it were always going to be a whole number, we could make it an integer. But because it's going to have decimal points after it, we're going to call it a double. I'm not sure why they call it that. So don't ask. And then we'll say dim1 as a double. And those are my 3 variables. Okay? Now, we need to ask the user for this information so we can put it in. So then we're going to do that next step. So we're going to say dp, and you can put as many spaces as you want. So it's just sometimes it helps to put a space between blocks of code so you know that all that code goes together. And then we talked in the first video about comments. So if you put an apostrophe, ask user for the date played using variable dp. Now, experienced coders are always going to write comments. And when I talk about comments, I think I may have mentioned this in the last video, but just think about your code. Imagine that you wrote it today, it works, and then you're not going to mess with it for a year. And then a year later, you're going to go back in, and you're going to look at it and you go, what did I do there? Your comments should be able to answer to you what you did there. So just imagine that you were going to forget everything you wrote and you were going to go back and look at this code from scratch as if you'd never seen it before. Make sure your comments tell you enough that you could figure out what you did and why you did it. So really great programmers may hardly ever even put comments in there because they're just, the code is so second nature to them, they don't need those things. But for you beginners, I would suggest for just about every line, put a comment, or at least every block. So we're going to say ask the user for date played. So now we're going to say our variable dp equals an input box. So that's what this lesson will be about. We'll call it input box. And then it's going to say what date was this, dude? And then we're going to ask them about how much we paid out. So we're going to say PO equals input box. How much did this shit cost you? And then we're going to ask how much we won. Did your dumbass win anything? All right. So if you see down here at the bottom, we have this locals window. And you can, I believe, where's that? Oh, locals window right here. You can turn it off and on with that in the watch window. So you're going to see that down here, it's going to show our variables as we run the program. Now, there's 2 ways to run the program. When you just want to run it, like you've written it, you know it works, and you just want to run it, you just hit play to run. The other way is to what's called step through it. So I think it gives you the option up here somewhere. I'm not sure where. Oh, step into, yeah. So it's under the debug header, step into. But you don't have to do that. You can see it just says F8. So just try and remember F8 because that's going to be your biggest friend as you learn to program. And what step into means is it means that it goes through each line of code one by one and then executes it after you hit F8 again. So we hit F8, it turns yellow, it goes into this debug mode. So anytime your code fails, like let's say I had hit play and I had screwed up and written something wrong, it's going to give me a runtime error. You've probably seen those when you're running programs from time to time. And it'll go into this debug mode. and it'll highlight in yellow the line that it got stuck on. So that's why this is called debug mode. But anyway, so we hit F8 and it started us in debug mode. And then it goes to the first line. Now you notice it skipped over all these because it doesn't need to do anything yet. That's not actual modifying the sheet. But you can see down here, it highlighted these, DP, PO, 1. And it gave them values. This might be a problem because it already put the value in here as date. It might be, date may already have a pre-programmed function where it just uses today's date. We'll see. But anyway, it went to the first code, and right now you can see it's trying to make it as 12 a.m. today. So we hit F8 again, and boom, it pops up a little box. So we'll say today's date is 7/5/2020. Okay. It takes me to my next one, but it didn't execute it yet. I got to hit F8 again. InputBox. How much does this shit cost you? So we'll say $50. Okay. And then hit F8 again to run the next line. Did your dumbass win anything? Let's say I did win. Maybe I wasn't a dumbass today. So okay. Boom. And now it's at the last line, which is just the end sub. Now, you can see it didn't do anything over here because we didn't tell it to do anything over here. But you can see down here, it defined my variables. It made DP 7/5/2020. It made PO 50, and it made 1 200. So I declared these variables. I asked the input user to give me the information on these variables, and we did. And now you can also see if I hover over the variable, it shows me what it is now. All right? So that's kind of useless because I didn't tell it to go anywhere. Well, I could. So we'll say ask the user for date played using variable. And I only explained my first thing, but we'll say, you know, like, let's just imagine I had made this comment to explain all three of them at once. But anyway, so now that's sort of a block of code. So now we want to put it somewhere, right? So we could do two things. We could go range A21 equals DP. All right. So now if we take this and we slide it back up, so I'm just dragging it. I clicked it and dragged it up. And I hit F8 to run that line. Boom. It puts it there. And you can see it didn't move my cursor over there or anything. It didn't have to. It just, we told it that's what we want to do. Now I can also, as opposed to range, so I'm going to delete that, we can use numerical cell references. So we can type cells. Now, when we do cell references, they're numbers for both. So you can see that rows are already numbered, but columns are A, B, C, and D. Well, with the cells property instead of the range property, they're both numbers. So this is 21 down, and it always does the row first, the column second, comma, and then this is the first column, V would be the second, and so forth. So 21 1. So we already deleted it out. If I slide back up here, and you can see it put the space in there for me. It can be very helpful like that. And a lot of times that's a good sign because it means it understood what you're trying to do and just kind of prettied it up for you. So we hit F8 and it does that as well. Now, I personally like to use the cells reference more because it makes it easier when you're doing things like offsetting. Like you can just do the math basically. But there's other reasons why you'll get into wanting to do it this way. And then, so like, for instance, I know that the next three things, or next two things I need to put in are, you know, 1 to the right, so that we know that's 2 equals, oops, equals PO, cells 21 3 equals 1. All right, so let's delete that again. So we go back here, we'll slide back up to this, start from the beginning, hit F8, it puts that in, puts that in, puts that in. And then if we hit F8 one more time, it would be over. But I'm not doing that because as soon as it ends, it deletes all this stuff out. Basically, it's waiting to run the next macro. And then my last thing, you can see I have this formula here where I take the cell above minus that plus that, right? So we'll go back here. So we'll say cells 21, 4. And now we're going to have it do some math. So equals cells 20, because we're doing this one above it, 4 minus cells 21, 2 plus cells 21, 3. All right. So we said, okay, and in this last cell, 21 down, 4 across, equals cells 20 down and 4 across, so this one, minus cells 21 and 2 across, so that's here, plus cells 21, 3, which is here. Oh, so because I did all that, it wanted me to end my code. So I just hit F8, I slide all the way down to this last thing because that's the only part I want to do left. And boom, there you go. All right. Now, I could have also, remember, this number and this number I got from these variables, right? So I could have done this even easier. I could have said cells 20-4, so I'm going to delete this out so we can sort of start all over again, equals, or cells 21, 4, this one here, equals this minus this plus this. So minus this was our PO, so we could have just said PO, and then plus 1, because that's my other variable, right? So let's go back, because you can see these are blank because we had to start over again, right? So we're going back, plus the date, 7, 10, 2020. I think I set a different date last time, it's okay. Hit F8 again, how much did this cost you? 50. Hit F8 again. Did your dumbass win anything? Well, let's say I had a really good night. I won 250. And then hit F8, boom, boom, and boom. Okay? So there's a number of ways we could have attacked that. Now, you notice I hit F8 and I stepped through it every time, but obviously once you run it, you don't do all that. So let's stop. If we hit play, it just asks us 7, 10, 2020. I hit enter, it brings me up to the next window. 50, enter, brings me up to the next window. 200, boom, and it finished it. It didn't ask me for anything in the last one, it just did all the math for me. So anyway, that's what how you use an input box, and that's how you sort of reference cells. And hopefully this kind of gives you a general idea of a simple code you might write.